Hello, friends, and let's get started.
Jack worked as a manager in a large company where every day was bursting with hundreds of tasks and meetings. But today, everything was going smoothly. Negotiations closed faster, clients were satisfied, and his co-workers didn't ask him to stay late. Buying a bouquet of scarlet roses on the way out, the same ones his wife Lauren adored most, he almost ran through the streets, anticipating how happy she'd be. Today I'm going to show her how much I love her, he thought as he clutched the stems of the roses, ready to become a symbol of his tenderness. As Jack walked up to the door of their cozy home, his heart pounded with anticipation. He remembered the first time he'd seen Lauren at a party at a mutual friend's house 5 years ago. In a long green dress with a floral pattern, she was the epitome of femininity. He laughed as he remembered her smile, a little shy, but with infinite warmth. Since then, they had been through all the joys and difficulties together. Moves, career changes, the loss of close relatives, and it seemed that their marriage was only growing stronger. But for the past 6 months, something had gone wrong. He began to notice Lauren looking more and more into the void, as if she were missing something. Tonight, he hoped to bridge that crack. Opening the door, Jack carefully set his briefcase in the hallway and tried to surprise himself by quietly sneaking into the living room, only to suddenly appear in front of Lauren with a bouquet. He had a picture in his mind. She was probably cooking dinner or watching TV, and he'd catch her off guard with his romantic stunt. He had anticipated her smile, her hug, her kiss. But what he saw upon entering the living room turned his warm fantasy into the scalding cold of reality. The shock scene caught him off guard like a blow to the back of the head. On the leather couch, his wife Lauren sat on top of him on her knees, spreading her legs over Todd, his co-worker and worst buddy. Jack saw her dress pulled up above her hips, her bare legs wrapped around her lover's waist, and her fingers digging into his back. Their bodies moved in a jagged, impatient rhythm, filled with lust. A muffled thump in his temples, whistling in his ears. Jack didn't immediately realize he was breathing heavily, clutching the bouquet so that the rose thorns dug into his skin. Todd grabbed Lauren by the hair and pulled her to him, and she pressed into him as if she depended on this moment. Their moans were muffled, but it was enough to make Jack's eyes swim. Lauren was the first to notice him. Her eyes rounded, her lips ajar in panic, but her body still reflexively clung to her lover. Todd turned, his face pale and his gaze racing. Jack watched them in silence. He didn't know how many seconds had passed, but he knew for sure this was the end. Not their marriage, not their relationship, but their lives as they had been until that moment. The flowers fell out of his hands, scattering across the floor as Jack's heart plummeted into the abyss. He couldn't tell whether the agony piercing him was anger, betrayal, or all-consuming despair. Lauren recoiled when she saw him, and Todd quickly jumped to his feet, confused for words of justification. Their faces were twisted with fear and shame, and Jack stood immovable, like a petrified statue. No one uttered a word. "You'll be sorry, I swear," Jack said quietly, almost in a whisper. There was no hysteria or tears in his eyes, though he was tearing up inside. Jack's gaze darted between Lauren and Todd, as if trying to find one reasonable explanation. But for a moment, the fire of unwavering determination flashed in his eyes, and he did something no one expected. He turned and walked away, slamming the door so hard that the glass in the hallway shook. That cold, restrained gesture frightened both Lauren and Todd more than if he'd come at them with his fists. As Jack stepped out of the doorway, he felt the night air pounding against his face. His soul was cold, a lump of resentment and pain growing inside him. But he knew that if he let his emotions get the better of him now, he'd sink into a useless scandal, throw all that pain away, and then he'd be devastated. "No," he thought, striding away down the night street. "I won't give them that kind of relief. I will do things differently." In the back of his mind, the idea of a cold, merciless vengeance was kindled, one that would strike at his most vulnerable spot, where they would feel the pain as keenly as he felt it now. He'd left the house all night, disconnected his phone, and wandered the streets, devising a plan that would turn Todd and Lauren's lives upside down. A dark determination flared in his eyes, and the trust that had once bound him to his beloved wife turned to ash. The next day, Jack showed up at the office as if nothing had happened. His co-workers greeted him with their usual smiles, but he noticed the slanted glances from Todd, who looked nervous and twitchy. Todd's face twitched and his hands clenched into fists, as if he were waiting for an imminent confrontation. But Jack ignored his presence, sitting down at his desk and going about his business with a nonchalant air. This cold demeanor, devoid of accusations, was beginning to scare Todd more than if Jack had made a scene. The atmosphere in the office hallway was oppressive. Everyone realized something was wrong, but no one knew the details. It doesn't matter how you act. The important thing is not to show your cards until the end, Jack reminded himself as he watched Todd nervously running around the office. But he would take care of Todd later. Right now, he was more interested in what was going on with Lauren, who kept sending messages and leaving voicemails in an attempt to explain herself. Jack's phone was flooded with requests to meet. We need to talk. It's not what you think. I'll explain everything. He removed them with the cold-bloodedness of an executioner, seeing her trying to escape the impending disaster. In the evening, Jack finally agreed to talk to Lauren, but he chose a place he knew well, a small cafe not far from the office. It was there that he and she had once discussed plans for the future about marriage and family life. Now Jack was deliberately bringing back memories of their happy past, to make the contrast with the present more painful. When Lauren arrived, she looked depressed and distracted. Her eyes were red. Apparently she'd been crying all night. But Jack felt no pity for her, just a cold interest in how deeply she would regret her betrayal. "Jack, I know you're angry," Lauren began, trying to keep her composure, but her voice betrayed the tension. I didn't mean for it to happen like this. It all happened so fast, I was confused. Todd, he just happened to be there when I felt bad. I don't know what came over me." She spoke, faltering, trying to find the right words, but Jack didn't seem to hear her. He was looking at her, the very woman he had loved and protected, but now he saw her as a stranger. "You used to be my everything, Lauren," he thought, "and now you're just part of my plan." And that thought burned him from the inside out, giving him the strength to keep playing the game. "Angry?" he asked with an icy sneer. "You know, Lauren, I'm not angry anymore. I just realized how naive I was when I thought we were worthy of each other." His tone made her wince, and her throat constricted with the tears that came. Lauren wanted to lunge toward him, to take his hand, but Jack pulled her palm away, making it clear that intimacy was inappropriate. He paid for his coffee without a fuss, without another word, and left the cafe, leaving her in a state of confusion and guilt. His true purpose, however, was not to make her feel sorry for him, but to get her to start reaching for him again with all her passion. From that point on, Jack began to proceed methodically. He found out that Lauren had a long-time dream, a trip to a small coastal town that she had told him about in the early days of their relationship. They'd never found the time to go there, but now Jack realized he could use that long-held dream for his own purposes. He'd been dropping hints to Lauren that we should go somewhere together to talk things over and get things back to the way they were. He'd seen hope flash in her eyes, and she'd thought it was his first step toward forgiveness. But for Jack, it was just the next step in the plan. In parallel, Jack used situations at work to surreptitiously put sticks in the wheels for Todd. Nothing big, but enough to make him look incompetent in the eyes of his superiors. A few broken deals due to Todd's fault, although in fact it was Jack who discreetly changed figures in the reports, a couple of blunders in presentations. Jack substituted some files. All this gradually turned the self-confident colleague into a man who was always making excuses. Todd was starting to lose the respect of his coworkers, and the whispers around the office were multiplying. And every time Todd tried to talk to Jack, he looked at him like he was nothing or waved him away like a pesky fly. Inside, Jack could feel his plan gaining momentum every day. When the weekend came, Jack finally decided to formalize the romantic weekend. He told Lauren, "I'm ready to give us a chance. Let's get out of town and try to sort ourselves out away from all the noise." Lauren was in anticipation and almost cried tears of relief. She still didn't understand why Jack wasn't asking questions or demanding explanations, but she figured it was for the best. If he was asking her to come with him, he still cared. She didn't realize that Jack was deliberately draining her of all her love, fueling her hopes for a reunion so he could strike a devastating blow later. They came to a small coastal town where they had once dreamed of spending their honeymoon. Everything about the place breathed an air of romance. Narrow streets, quiet beaches with golden sand, small restaurants with live music. Lauren looked excited, as if the young girl who had once won Jack's heart had awakened in her. From the very first moments, she tried to surround him with warmth and affection to prove her devotion. And Jack could already feel a bitter resolve growing inside him. He hadn't forgotten what had happened, and he wasn't about to forgive. But for the sake of his plan, he had to play the part of the reconciling husband. The evening of that day was particularly warm. They went out to the pier, sat down on an old bench, and Lauren leaned against Jack's shoulder and said softly, "I'm sorry." Her voice shook and tears glistened in her eyes. She thought he was here to hear her repentance, to give them a chance at a new chapter in their relationship. But Jack only stroked her hair, replying, "It's going to be okay. We'll get through this." Lauren kissed him, and he responded to the kiss with restrained but fervent tenderness. The pulse of a vigilante beat inside him, knowing it was only a mask and he would not let go of his target. Later that night, in the quiet room of the small hotel house, it was as if Lauren had rediscovered Jack. He was attentive, passionate, guessing her desires, making her feel the full force of his love. Their embrace seemed to her a return to that golden time when nothing marred their happiness. But Jack had not forgotten that the purpose of the night was more than reconciliation. He was careful to infuse every touch with a tenderness that would bind Lauren to him, so that he could leave her without pity when she was torn between hope and guilt. In the morning, waking up in his arms, Lauren was radiant with happiness. She avoided the subject of Todd, as if afraid that the mention of him might shatter the fragile peace they seemed to have regained. Jack deliberately acted as if he'd forgotten about the affair. He made her tea, brought her croissants from the nearest bakery, then suggested they go to the beach. Her heart fluttered with gratitude, and she kept repeating, "I love you, Jack. I know I made a mistake. I don't know how to make it up to you, but I'll do anything to make you believe in me again." He answered her with a smile that made her fall even more in love with her own husband. In those 2 days, Lauren had rediscovered herself, enthusiastically accepting every show of affection from Jack. He acted as if he were giving them both a second chance, even though deep down he felt a ruthless anger brewing. As they walked along the beach, holding hands, he remembered Todd's look and his confusion, imagining him floundering around town, not knowing where Lauren was or what was going on. Todd probably expects Lauren to call him, but she didn't. She was completely at the mercy of her husband's charms, and it gave Jack a perverse sense of satisfaction. Jack didn't relax, however. He clearly realized that this weekend was just one step in a long chain of revenge. When they returned home, he continued to nourish Lauren with romance. Movie nights, wine, quiet conversations by candlelight. He learned to suppress his outbursts of anger, instead turning every resentment and prick in his heart into a new detail of the plan. Lauren, meanwhile, was sinking deeper and deeper into the illusion of restoring her marriage, gradually losing touch with Todd, who didn't understand why she'd stopped contacting him. For Jack, this was exactly what was needed, to separate them, to make Todd feel cheated as Jack had once felt. In the office, Jack acted as if there was no conflict between him and Todd. He kept a mask of calm and professionalism, communicating only on work matters, never once mentioning personal matters. This aloofness drove Todd crazy. He would try to come into Jack's office to talk to him, or catch him at the coffee machine, to finally say, "Jack, we have to get to the bottom of this." But Jack would just throw him a cold glance and walk on by. There were rumors in the hallways that a black cat had run between them, but no one had any idea how serious it was. Meanwhile, Jack saw Todd sinking deeper and deeper into helplessness and fear, which secretly pleased him. Almost a month had passed since the day Jack had caught Todd and Lauren together. In that time, he had created the illusion of renewed love from his wife and made sure that she had finally drifted away from Todd. Lauren returned to the image of the perfect wife, trying to see Jack off with a smile every morning, cooking his favorite meals, meeting him late at night, and sharing her thoughts and plans for the future. It was like she was trying to win his trust all over again. And it came as a real shock to her when, after a few weeks, she felt strange, dizziness, slight nausea, mood swings. Lauren, who was beginning to suspect a pregnancy, took a test. When she saw 2 stripes, her legs gave out. She sat in the bathroom looking at the plastic strip that would change her life forever. Fear mixed with joy, anxiety with hope. How do I tell Jack about this? She thought. He's just beginning to forgive me. What if he thinks the baby isn't his? Inner turmoil was rocking her composure. At last, pulling herself together, she decided that she could not hide it any longer. It was her duty to tell her husband. After all, she felt he was the baby's father, since they'd had quite a few intimate moments after the weekend. When Lauren confessed her pregnancy to Jack, he looked at her surprised, but not with suspicion, but rather as if everything was exactly as it should be. Her heart twitched with relief when he said, "I'm happy. This is the best gift you could have given me." She threw herself around his neck and tears of joy flowed down her cheeks. In that moment, she felt their relationship take on a whole new depth. But Jack knew the effect this news would have on Todd, and he realized that here it was, the decisive stage of his plan. Soon rumors swept through the office that Lauren was pregnant with Jack's child. Todd, who was still hoping Lauren would come back to him, was the last to know and felt the ground slipping from under his feet. He went to her house to find out, but Jack was already waiting for him on the porch. Opening the door, he invited Todd in with feigned politeness. "I think you and I have a lot to talk about," he said, giving him a look of mock satisfaction. Todd walked into the living room where he had once sat with Lauren, but now everything around him screamed that he didn't belong here. Tension hung in the room. Todd was confused and didn't know where to begin. Lauren avoided his gaze, clutching Jack's hand. The atmosphere was becoming oppressive. Finally, Todd squeezed out, "Lauren, I just want to know what's going on. You said you didn't love him, that everything was dead between you two. And now..." He didn't finish the sentence because Jack interrupted him in a calm and cold voice. "Oh, you don't know how happy we are. Thank you, Todd, for refreshing our feelings. You know, shock can help people realize who they really care about. Thanks to you, Lauren and I are even stronger than before." Todd shrank back, as if from a blow. His face paled, and his hands shook with anger or despair. Lauren didn't look at him at all, as if Todd didn't exist. But the most painful thing was what he felt. She really was happy around Jack, no matter what had happened in the past. Todd realized he had lost. He rose slowly, trying to retain the remnants of his pride, and headed for the exit. But Jack caught up with him, put a hand on his shoulder, and quietly said a phrase that finished Todd off. "You thought you took my wife away? Wrong, buddy. I'm the one who took away your illusion of victory." Todd turned around, and something between rage and terror flashed in his eyes. But there was no strength left to object. He knew he looked pathetic and helpless right now. He knew that Jack had won this battle, and won on all fronts. The baby Lauren was expecting was a clear indication that she'd made her choice. Todd once believed that she'd leave Jack and they'd be together. It all seemed like a crazy dream to him now. He ran out of the house, slamming the door, leaving Lauren and Jack alone in their seemingly cozy world. But that world was built by Jack not so much on forgiveness, but on the desire to win. Lauren closed her eyes and pressed herself against Jack. She still didn't fully understand what had happened between the men in those seconds. "It's okay," he whispered in her ear, putting his arm around her shoulders. She wanted to believe that his words were sincere, that he was truly happy about her pregnancy. Maybe she guessed that there was something more behind his calm, some deep-seated resentment and desire to put Todd in his place. But right now, Lauren was just glad that the worst moment was over and her marriage was saved. She didn't realize that Jack was rejoicing, almost triumphant, that his plan had finally succeeded. The next day at work, Todd tried to behave as usual, but everyone noticed that he was very depressed. He was acting distracted, making mistakes. Jack, on the other hand, seemed focused and businesslike, mentioning in passing that he had a new addition to his family. His co-workers congratulated him, expressed their joy for the happy father-to-be, and Todd's eyes flashed with desperate anger every time. He could hear other co-workers whispering, "Can you believe he and Lauren are back together? And she's expecting a baby. What a twist." And they said they were having a crisis. See, everything's fine. It was killing Todd inside. He could no longer find a place for himself in this company. And in the city, too, everything began to remind him of the crushing defeat. A few months passed. Lauren's belly had rounded noticeably, and she was blossoming before his eyes. Jack acted like the perfect husband. He took care of her, took her to doctors, bought the necessary things for the future child. Lauren still felt a slight unease, wondering if Jack had forgiven her completely. But he did everything he could to make her believe that they had finally overcome the crisis. He surrounded her with attention and even joyful troubles, and at first glance seemed the most loving man in the world. The closer the labor got, the more Lauren felt calm and confident that everything was over and their family was finding new happiness. Todd, meanwhile, had disappeared from sight. He had quit his job, unable to stand the atmosphere in the office. All signs indicated that he was feeling his helplessness and humiliation too acutely to continue to stick around. No one knew where he had gone. Some coworkers felt sorry for him. Others said it was his own fault, meddling with someone else's family. Jack shrugged his shoulders slightly as he listened to the gossip. For him, Todd had ceased to exist as soon as he'd played his part in the grand drama Jack had created. Now that the enemy had been defeated, he could enjoy a life where he had a wife and soon-to-be fatherhood. One evening, Jack and Lauren were walking down a quiet alley in the center of town. Spring was already taking hold. The trees were blooming, and the air was filled with the smell of freshness. Lauren walked under her husband's arm, glancing at his focused face from time to time. "Tell me," she said quietly, "have you forgiven me completely?" Jack stopped, stroked her cheek, and smiled softly. "I forgave you a long time ago," he answered, though he felt a different response inside. "I let go of my resentment only after I made sure Todd couldn't come between us again." But he didn't say it aloud. Lauren saw a reflection in one of the store windows. She and Jack looked like a typical happy couple expecting a new addition. She was suddenly reminded of all those nightmarish weeks. The guilt, fear, despair, and confused feelings that had bound her to Todd. But now it all seemed distant and insignificant. Increasingly, she felt as if that episode in her life had been nothing more than a fatal mistake from which she'd learned a lesson about how much she really loved her husband. And Jack, looking at her, continued to keep his secret. He had no intention of ever revealing to her the whole truth about how detailed and methodical he'd orchestrated the rekindling of their relationship to break Todd and make Lauren regret her choice. It was enough for him to know that everything was going according to his plan now. Toward the end of her pregnancy, Lauren was visibly nervous about giving birth. Jack, however, tried to remain calm and assured her that everything would be all right. He didn't think about Lauren's betrayal so often anymore, and his heart gradually calmed down. Revenge was accomplished, Todd was out of the picture, and his baby, would soon be born. Every time Lauren thanked him for his support, he only smiled slightly and thought, "You fully belong to me now. I can see it in your eyes." Outwardly, it was a warm look and a few encouraging words. The day came when Lauren felt well enough to take Jack for a walk in the park. They walked arm in arm, and at one point Jack stopped when he saw a lone figure near the fountain. His heart sank. It was Todd. He sat on a bench, stubbled, in a shabby jacket, staring into the water, seemingly without hope. Their gazes crossed. Todd shrank back, as if in shame, and Jack smiled slightly, as if to say, "You realize now that I won?" Lauren, not noticing Todd, asked, "Jack, is something wrong?" He only shook his head and replied, "No, everything's perfect, love," putting his arm around her shoulders as they moved on. And so ended this story in which Jack seemed to have gained everything he wanted. He had saved his marriage, humiliated his rival, and would soon be a father. But a quiet shadow of unresolved longing remained inside him. The love he felt for Lauren was no longer bright and serene, but a mixture of possessiveness, triumph, and the bitter realization that he would never have the same naive purity again. Lauren, who had sensed glimpses of his ambivalent feelings, preferred to ignore them, believing that time would heal all wounds. But now, as she walked beside her husband, feeling him stroking her belly, she sincerely hoped that their future would indeed be better and brighter. They had both made their choices, and now they had to live with the consequences. And that's where today's story ends. Thank you for watching to the end. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like and comment. We'd love to discuss this story with you. See you in the next video.